Okay, so I think we're live. So hello everyone and welcome to the Fistful of Dice live Q&A. It's been a while since I've done any live stuff. I tried to do something last week, but my computer wasn't really allowing for it, so I'm hoping that the video and audio is all okay. I'm also trying something. There's an app on Google Hangouts that is it's like a Q&A app. So I'm not sure if you guys are seeing like a Q&A option on the video, but there should be a way for you to submit questions for you to answer. So I'm going to be answering questions that I received yesterday on the Fistful of Dice Facebook, and also questions in the comments as well. So, and I'm also going to go ahead and pull up the video so that I can look at the comments as well. Okay, and then let me just do a quick setting here to Studio. Bad. I'm really hoping it's not. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started here with some questions that I received yesterday. I got lots of good questions. I put out a call for questions on the Fistful of Dice Facebook, which is just facebook.com/afistfulofdice. And if you're wanting to ask me questions during the Q&A, you can obviously leave them in comments. Or you can use the Google Hangout question and answer feature, which should pop up on your video at some point soon. So, okay, so here we go. So I'm going to try to answer these in the order that I received them. So the first question that I received came from, let's see here, came from Philip D. Flores on Facebook, and he asked, do you roll a stealth check every time for a rogue when he moves, or only roll once for the entire scene? The way I do stealth check, I hate having to roll the dice over and over and over again to try and do the same thing, so honestly, I don't have any hard and fast rules for doing stealth checks. Usually, I'll just kind of use common sense. So I'll think about, you know, if the rogue stealths and they successfully hide from some enemies, I would not have them roll another stealth check unless they did something that would make them more noticeable. So let's say instead of crouching, he stood up and started moving more quickly. I might have him roll another stealth check there just because he is sort of making himself more noticeable. Or if he was sticking to the shadows and all of a sudden he's moving into some torchlight. If he's, you know, trying to do kind of an action while he's stealth, so if he's trying to like pick a lock or something like that, I might have him roll again. So it really is just, I would say don't have your rogues roll stealth every time they move. It gets really tedious and it kind of takes away from the fun of being a rogue, honestly, because there's that way higher chance that you're going to mess up and get noticed. So I would say just use common sense when you're dealing with stealth checks. Just think about, is the rogue doing something right now that would bring more attention to where he is or what he's doing, and just kind of think about it like that. Really, I mean, that can apply to a lot of stuff when you're DMing. It's just common sense, thinking about it like that. So, okay, so the next question I got came from Matthew Robichaud, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It might be Robichaud or something, but what characters am I playing at the moment or want to play, and what's my favorite NPC at the moment? My favorite characters that I'm playing at the moment, so right now I'm playing, I've talked about him before, but I'm playing a druid character of mine named Vald, who I've been playing for probably a little over a year now. And he is a swamp druid, and he's kind of, you know, this dirty, bearded swamp druid who specializes in spiders. So he's really into spiders, and he actually has a cloak that is made of spider webs, and he has spiders kind of in the spider webs, and he kind of talks to them, and whenever he's doing like summons and he's summoning giant spiders, I always have him kind of like reach into his cloak and pull out some spiders and make them grow really big and stuff like that. So, you know, he's kind of got some cool flavor stuff. And so I started him, I think we started at like level 4, and he's coming up on level 12 or 13 here now. So I've been playing him for quite a while. Other characters that I'm playing right now, I have a Paladin character that I played a couple times, who is he's a Paladin that is, he's kind of like the old beat cop that's just seen too much and is like pretty much ready to retire, but he doesn't know how to do anything else. So I kind of based him off of Colonel Ty from Battlestar Galactica, the reimagined Battlestar Galactica series in 2004. And so he's kind of scarred up and gruff, and he's an alcoholic. I actually have he has a mechanical addiction. He has an addiction to alcohol, and so he has to consume alcohol, I think it's like every day, or he starts suffering from withdrawals, and the withdrawals do things like drain his constitution and stuff like that. So he's pretty fun. He's kind of a like a monster hunter type paladin, where he's lawful good. He's a good guy, but he's doing good things, but he's not really a good guy. Does that make sense? So his alignment is more about his actions and his motives rather than his personality and his core. Like in his backstory, he has a lot of stuff going down. He used to be a monk, like a peaceful monk, whose monastery was attacked by, I think it was some sort of monster. I can't really remember. It might have been orcs. You know, the old standby. You know, my village was attacked by blank. It's usually orcs. But and everyone was just wiped out, and he was like the sole survivor, and he just managed to barely escape with his life, and he's just kind of been wandering ever since. And actually, I got his idea from there's a prestige class in one of the old 3.5 books called Fist of Raziel, and they're like a special sect of I think Tormish paladins that follow this Archon Raziel, who in this very like militaristic, like, you know, monster hunting and killing, and like pretty violent, you know, good guys. So that's where I kind of got the idea for him. And then characters I want to play. I recently rolled up this guy. I can't really remember what his name is, but I rolled him up using Pathfinder, and I rolled him up using the background generator stuff that's in the oh, what is it? Is it the campaign guide? I think it's Ultimate Campaign. Ultimate Campaign has a background generator in it where you can randomly roll up things that have happened in your character's backstory, and there's actually a way to randomly come up with their alignment. And so what you do is you roll like a conflict that happened in their past, and then you roll how they resolved it, and the conflict has a number and the resolution has a number, and you like add those two numbers together, and whatever number you get is their alignment. So like my character that I rolled up, I rolled this conflict where he betrayed a friend, and I was like, okay, he betrayed a friend, and then so I kind of started thinking about that, and then I rolled the resolution, and the resolution was, or not the resolution, but like his reaction to this conflict, and his reaction was remorse and guilt. So I was like, okay. So I added those two numbers up, and I ended up getting, I think it was neutral good. He ended up being neutral good because he had done some bad things in his past, but he like remembered them with regret and remorse, and was trying to kind of make up for those things that he had done. So I come up with the alignment neutral good. And his whole deal is that he has all of these crazy weapons. I was looking through Ultimate Equipment, the Pathfinder book, and they've got, you know, all these cool kind of unique weapons, like whip swords and things like that. So I ended up kind of building him up around kind of strange and exotic weapons, and kind of thinking about him as like a, you know, he's from really far away, kind of a, you know, like foreign guy. He's like exotic type guy. So, and he was I think I built him up as a fighter rogue, I believe. I think was what I was doing. So, I'd like to play him at some point. And then my favorite NPC, I'm running a Call of Cthulhu game right now, and there's lots of kind of fun NPCs in that game. I'll just talk about 3 of them really quickly. The first one is he's the leader of this bureau, it's basically a bureau of paranormal investigation, and he's the leader of it. And he's a World War I veteran that basically laid on a grenade for his unit and managed to survive. I was kind of reading about these reports of people who had survived, basically sitting on a grenade in World War I. And that, they live these horrible lives because they just have, hundreds of pieces of shrapnel in their body, and they have to go through years and years of reconstructive surgery and therapy and stuff. So I was kind of looking into that, and I built up this guy who's basically kind of a no frills Southern military type guy who's just has dealt with a lot of pain and loss in his life, and he has kind of the scars and the facial deformity of early plastic surgery, early reconstructive surgery, where they're taking a chunk of your butt and putting it on your face type stuff. So he's just been through a lot, and but he also saw some stuff in World War I that kind of inspired him to form this bureau, essentially, that investigates paranormal stuff. And then another couple guys that are involved in that bureau. There's a gorilla who, it's a long story, but essentially this kid was dying and his dad found this tribal mask. It's like a gorilla mask, and he used this mask to transfer his son's soul into the body of a gorilla, to try and basically preserve his son's life until he could figure out a way to get his son back into his own body and have him be cured. But the dad ended up dying, and there's this whole thing. So it's basically a little boy is stuck inside this gorilla. So he kind of has the demeanor of a gorilla, but he has the intelligence of a young child. So he's basically a very intelligent gorilla who is just kind of trying to fit in. And so he's in the bureau as well. And then there's also a German scientist who is a ghost living inside of a radio. So he talks to them through the radio, so that's pretty fun. I have lots of kind of fun stuff like that in my Call of Cthulhu campaign. I'm kind of coming at it from a pulp perspective, and it's very Hellboy. It's super BPRD type stuff. I love the Hellboy comics and movies, so it's definitely inspired that campaign and what they're doing in that campaign. So yeah, that's a great question though. That took me a lot longer to answer than I thought it was going to. Okay, the next question on Facebook, I'm also going to check the comments here and see if there's any questions in the comments. Okay, there's a couple comments down there. I'll answer these really quick. So Alonzo Ambrosio asks, how old am I? I am 26. Is that right? Yeah, I'm 26. And then he also asked if I liked Pokemon, and if I do, who's my fave? I do like Pokemon. I'm actually playing Pokemon Y right now, and my favorite Pokemon is probably Psyduck, I would say. You see him? See him back there? There he is, Psyduck. Okay, so those are the comments from the video. Okay, another comment from Facebook. From Tony Simmons, asked yesterday, how would you introduce a new PC into an existing campaign? This happens a lot. Because especially with my group, you get people kind of coming and going a lot of the time. People come in and people leave, and if you want to have a campaign going any amount of time, you're going to have players kind of coming in and out. So this is a really good question. The way I usually go about introducing new PCs into a campaign is I simply think about an idea of why they would be motivated to join the party and why the party would accept them into the party. So you have to think about what does this new character need or want, and why would he benefit the party or she benefit the party, and just kind of think about it like that. A good example is okay, the party is stopping in a city and you have this new PC joining up. So maybe they get to the city and they find out that they need somebody who knows you know, a certain area of the city really well, or who has a lot of connections or something, and they end up kind of hooking up with this other PC who at first is just kind of like, you know, I'll help you out, but they end up kind of sticking together longer than that. So that tends to work better than just, okay, you have a new character in the party. You know what I mean? Like it's pretty easy to come up with a way where that person can join up with the other party members without having it seem too shoehorny. You know what I mean? So that's how I usually do it. Is just kind of look at the characters' motivations and like what they need, and then just kind of play around with that and figure out a way to kind of make it work. Dalin J. Nay asked, what has been the most rewarding thing that you've had in a session or campaign? The most rewarding thing, well, probably I guess my best, like my most fun moment as a dungeon master was, I've talked about this before, but I had an NPC betray the party in a campaign a year or two ago, and this was an NPC that they had really come to trust and like and rely on. He was a very helpful ally to them, and it was one of those things where I knew he was a bad guy, and I was playing it so just, you know, thinking about, I want this NPC to betray the party, and I also want it to make sense. It's going to be one of those things, you know, when I'm thinking about it in my head, I'm like, it's going to be one of those things where the party is both shocked, but also not shocked, because they're like, oh, no, he's a bad guy, and then they're like, oh, of course he's a bad guy, right? You know, like one of those things where it's like, man, he betrayed us, and it totally makes sense that he would, you know what I mean? And it ended up going really, really well. You know, I had this big reveal where they killed the main bad guy, you know, and they thought that it was over. And the NPC had showed up and been like, you know, good job, you guys. Thank you for killing him for me. And, you know, ran this other NPC through with a sword, and they were just like, oh my god, he's a bad guy. You know, it was like, everyone's reaction at the table was just like, oh shit. You know, like it was perfect. And it was one of those things where I kind of built it up and built it up. And I could kind of point to different things in the campaign where it was like, here was a hint, and here was another hint, you know, and that was just really rewarding to have something that I had kind of built up and had, you know, kind of planned in my mind actually come to fruition in the way that I sort of intended. And obviously there were deviations here and there. You know, I talk about this a lot, but my DM style is very improv-centric, so there was a lot of deviations here and there, but the ultimate, what I wanted to happen, ended up happening, you know, pretty close to how I envisioned it. So that was pretty cool. And then I guess the other most rewarding thing for me in gaming, it has to do with this channel, actually. I'm gonna get a little sappy here. I get a lot of comments on my videos, and my favorite comments and messages that I get are people that say that my videos helped inspire them to get into gaming, or inspired them to take on the role of the GM in their group. Or, you know, I've had a couple people say, you know, I used to game as a kid, and I just haven't done it for like 20, 30 years, and I watched a couple of your videos, and man, I'm getting back into it. I'm gonna you know, buy some books, and I'm gonna get back into it. And hearing stuff like that, hearing that my videos helped people, you know, either get into gaming or get back into gaming, it's so surreal to me, and it's also like, it's so cool, because I love this hobby so much, and I've been doing it for so long, and like to have even a little piece of influence, that little bit of influence on a community like this is unreal, man. I can't even describe it. You know, when I first started making videos, you know, I was watching guys like, you know, Tower Guard DM and Dungeon Master Johnny and Samwise 7 RPG and you know, all these guys, and I'm just thinking, man, you know, these guys really know their stuff, and you know, I think I'm going to throw in with these guys and you know, and have a discussion with these guys. And I never envisioned, you know, coming, you know, what is it, 2 years later or something like that, having the number of subscribers and the number of viewers that I have, you know, it's really surreal. So I'm always thankful for people watching and discussing things with me, and people in this community. We can talk a lot about the drama that's happening in the community all the time and stuff, but really, like, this community is like some of the most like civil, like helpful people. Everyone's just really cool and nice and down to earth, and I've had lots of good discussions just even in the comments on my videos with people. So that has been really rewarding as well. Is this whole Fistful of Dice venture, and just talking with people all over the world and helping DMs, in the Middle East and helping DMs in Australia, and just it's awesome. And inspiring people to get into gaming is just probably the best thing ever. It's I never imagined being able to do something like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and check the YouTube comments really quick here. So Alonzo asks, in Fallout, how do I blow up Wasteland? I don't know, dude. I don't know. I don't even know what that means. I don't know. Okay. Oh, we just got a question here from the... so I'm going to go ahead and click on this. So the question I'm answering here is from Kosking555. He asks, I'm running a sand pirate game. How would I make the sand run like a plasma difficult terrain? I think he means terrain, or just make it run like Stormwreck? So I think what you're asking is like, how would I make sand like water? I don't know. That's an interesting idea. I don't know how I would do that. I think what I would do is, it couldn't just be sand. It would have to be like magical sand. I think I would have it be like quicksand. So if somebody fell overboard of one of these like sand pirate ships, I would have a certain amount of time or a certain amount of rounds before they would, sink into the sand, basically. So I would think of it less like sand, less like water, and more like a quicksand type situation or consistency is what I would do. I hope that helps. I'm not really sure. I'm not super understanding your question, but I hope that helps. Let me check YouTube comments really quick. And then I'll go back to the Facebook questions if we don't have any more on YouTube. Okay, well that refreshes. Okay, so the next question I have is, what is the best thing to do if your players stray from the storyline that you came up with? That question comes from Alex Nozar on Facebook. That is a great question and something that I love talking about. I love talking about players straying from the plan, because there is nothing you can do about that. Unless you want to railroad your players and straight up tell your players, no, you can't do that, then they're going to stray from the storyline. Think about you as a player. You're not going to just sit there and just go from location to location that your DM is telling you. That's boring. You want to be able to do, you want to be able to stay true to your character, and you want to be able to explore this world. So as a DM, do not be afraid of your players straying from the path that you've set. First off, don't set the path so straight and narrow. You know what I mean? I talk about this a lot, but improving is it's such a necessary skill for people running games. You have to be able to improv. You have to be able to roll with the punches. You have to be able to be creative on the fly. And that's not to say that you need to be at the top of your game, every turn, every twist and turn of the story. You got to be able to just run with it, Don't be afraid. This is great advice from Kirk, PhD&D. He's talking about it in his new series where he kind of talks about like DM lessons. He's talking about taking your time. And man, that is so true. It's so true. Like, if you've got this idea of where the campaign or where the session is going, and all of a sudden your players go off in this different direction, if you take a couple minutes and just kind of gather your thoughts and, kind of say, it's all right, we're going a different path. That doesn't mean that we're going to not end up where I want them to go, but it might mean that we go a different way to get there. or maybe we're going to get someplace else different. Take some time and just chill out and realize that, you know, it's a game, and even if I take some time here, gather my thoughts, come up with another plan here, it's not like the players are going to be like, oh man, we really caught them off guard, you know, because they're not looking for you to fail. That's the thing, is a lot of DMs feel like their players are just waiting for them to mess up. They're not. They're just there to have a good time, and most of them are appreciative that you're even running the game. So what I would say is, first off, don't have your story set in stone so much. You know, don't have these, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. A good way I think of it is have your scenes. Have your things in your head that you know need to happen. So players have to enter the dungeon. Players have to get this item. Players have to fight this guy. But the paths in between those three scenes, you don't have them completely like set in stone. You know what I mean? They're kind of malleable. They can kind of do these things in any order. You know what I mean? They can go different routes, do different things to get there. They can fight these goblins, or they can bypass them completely. They can try to be diplomatic. They can try to do combat. They can be sneaky. They can just rush in with swords drawn. You know, they can try to talk this NPC into coming with them. They can, you know, rig some ingenious siege engine. You know, you gotta just roll with the punches. A good example of this is I was running a session on New Year's Eve last year, and I laid out this map of a fort that the PCs were coming up to. And I hadn't really noticed, but on the map, it was one of these pre-made maps, like a D&D map. There were catapults on the towers. And one of my players goes, hey, are those catapults, like, workable? And I kind of look down at the map, and I'm like, in my head, I go, oh shit, I didn't even notice there were catapults there. And I go, you know, they look like they still work. What ended up happening is the players ended up waiting until the orcs inside this fort were asleep, and they climbed up the walls, and they like rigged this catapult. They spun it around and pointed it inside the fort and started catapulting stuff inside the fort. And I hadn't planned for this at all. That was not a solution that I had come up with for dealing with these orcs, but I kind of just ran with it, and it ended up being so fun. It was so cool because, you know, they had two players like working this catapult, and then they had two more like kind of guarding the walkways so that things couldn't get up to the catapult. So they're fighting on the catwalks, and this catapult's just every couple turns is you know, hucking these huge boulders into the camp. It was really fun, and if I had been too into my story, too into my idea of what was going to happen, I probably would have said, oh, they're not catapults, that's just part of the map, you know, or something like that, which, you know, would have been kind of lame. So, okay, so we got a couple questions coming in here on the Q&A. So I'm gonna do those. This is kind of cool. I like the Q&A thing on Google Hangout. That is neat. So I'm gonna go ahead and answer this question here. So this question comes from Mihai Adrian Nastase, and if I said that wrong, I'm so sorry. And he or she asks, do you hesitate to kill players in your campaigns? Is it okay making the tension of death more present? No, I don't hesitate to kill players, but I'm not one of those DMs that's like outright like trying to kill the players, you know what I mean? I'm a big fan of giving the players a challenge where they feel like we could potentially die here. And if they do, then that's how it goes. I can honestly say I haven't killed a player in a long, long time. I have not killed a player character in a long time, and that might just be part of my DM style that I tend to hold off. I mean, maybe I do hesitate a little bit, but it's not a conscious thing. Really, you have to look at your group and try to decide if having the sort of the idea of death kind of hanging over their heads is going to help them with their role play and their character motivation. Normally it does. Normally players don't really mind having it be a challenge, you know, having to think strategically and kind of be smart about things. They can't just rush into every situation, swords drawn, and expect to come out okay. You know, sometimes they have to think about it. And you know, having the idea of death, having the notion that their characters are mortal, you know, will help with that. You know, and a few times my characters have I've lost a few characters over the years, and when the characters get down to about 9 or 10 hit points, and you're starting to realize, man, one more hit and I'm 0 or below hit points. I'm potentially dead. You kind of start to come to terms with it almost, where you're like, would I be okay if this character died? Like, what would I do, man? They're gonna die here. They might die here. And it kind of forces you to almost like like think about, man, am I okay with this character dying? You look at your character's mortality, you know what I mean? So it kind of forces, even if the character doesn't die, it forces them to kind of think about it, and almost it can help role play, because they kind of start thinking about the character, and man, how would this character face death? How would they deal with dying? Would they turn tail and run when they're feeling like they're about to go down, or would they stay in the fight? You know what I mean? So my short answer is no, I do not actively hesitate to kill players. I also do not actively try to kill them. Some DMs are like, oh man, I'm a total hard-ass DM. You bet, characters are dying left and right. And it's like, I guess if that's your style, that's fine, but that's just not really me, so. Okay, we got another question here from the Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and select it here. And this comes from the Harvestarian, who asks, as a practice improvisational GM, how do you truly enter the minds of your NPCs? I feel as though I only get halfway into the skins of my cast of characters, but never fully immersed into their personalities. Man, that is a great question, and I mean, that's something that I struggle with too, as somebody who's improvisational, especially if I'm coming up with NPCs kind of on the fly, which I do sometimes. Normally I have my NPCs kind of already in mind, and I'll have a few notes written on them, but if I'm coming up with an NPC on the fly, like the characters are like, oh, we want to go talk to the local constable, and I'm like, I don't know. Okay, yeah, sure. You can go talk to the constable. I'll have to come up with something. One thing I do is I come up with something physical and something non-physical about them. So the players are going to, let's give an example. The players are going to talk to the constable. I was not planning on having them interact with the law enforcement of this town, but they want to go talk to the constable. So I instantly think, I just come up with a quick character, and I have several tools that I use to do this. I've got this thing, a box of dice called Rory's Story Cubes, and those are dice that just have images on them, and they kind of help spur your creativity. So you roll them, and you get like a tree and a skull and a compass, and you're like, oh, this guy loves nature. He collects animal bones, and he is an explorer, or something, something like that. It'll just help spur your creativity. But so they go and talk to the constable, and I go, okay, so you go and walk up to the constable, and he is a half-elven man, middle-aged, and he's missing a leg. He has a peg leg, and that's just me. I need something physical to set this character apart, so I'm going to take one of his legs away. And they start talking to him, and then I start thinking about what's something that happened in this guy's past that can help me inform what this guy is like, what he acts like, what he talks like, his motivations. And I start kind of thinking, how did he lose his leg? And I come up with the idea that this bugbear chieftain that the players are hunting is the guy that took this constable's leg. So all of a sudden, this guy's backstory starts kind of opening up like a flower in front of me, and I start seeing these little things where it's like, he's a young half-elven man. He's, serving in the law enforcement of this village, and he loses his leg fighting this big bugbear guy. And, he's just never quite been the same since. He lost this piece of himself, and he's not the fighter he used to be. He's not the man he used to be. Maybe he's turned to drink to help with the pain of his missing limb, and, so I kind of start thinking about this character more and more. So it's, you don't need to sit there and come up with these complex things. It's all about just, what is this one thing? Tell me about this character, and how can I open that up and look at it more? You know what I mean? How can I pry this person's brain open and see what's going on in there? And it's also one of those things where it's like, you're not going to know an NPC right out the gate. You might, this might be an NPC, a reoccurring NPC, that it's going to take some time to learn and know. And that goes with characters too. People want to come to the table with this completely fleshed out character that they know everything about. It's just not going to happen. You're going to learn about this character as the campaign goes on, and the character at level 20 is not going to be the same character at level 1. I'll tell you that right now. Like, your character is going to change, and they should change because, you know, people change. So think about it like that. First of all, don't get too hung up on trying to make the NPCs super and getting super immersed in them right away, because you're not going to be able to, unfortunately. And also just think about simple ways to set this NPC apart physically, mentally, personality-wise, and then kind of use those things, those traits that you've come up with, to kind of think about their past, where they're coming from, what they want, their motivations, all of that kind of stuff. So I hope that helps you. That's definitely something I struggle with too. So, and we've got a question here from Ed Helldude, who asks, what's the gray box in the shelf behind me next to the Pathfinder books? Oh, that is my AD&D 2nd edition Forgotten Realms campaign setting box. One of my most prized possessions. Got this at a half-price books a while ago. It's full of the old Forgotten Realms maps and some campaign guides, lots of different little materials like all the god symbols here, and some Shadowdale stuff, and a couple of little modules in here. So this is just something I picked up. You know, I don't play AD&D. I played it a couple times, but it really is. It's just a kind of me really being into the Forgotten Realms. Forgotten Realms was where I started as a D&D player, and it's where I started as a fantasy fan. You know, reading books and stuff. So, you know, I'm really into Forgotten Realms. I've always really liked it. I know a lot of people kind of find it kind of trite and stuff, but you know, I really like Forgotten Realms, and having this is just kind of a cool thing to have on the game shelf, you know. And I've got all those maps. I'm planning on probably framing a couple of those maps and having those out in my game room. So, okay, so I've got questions building up. I'm going to go back to Facebook really quick because I've got a ton of questions that I haven't got to yet. Mikey Dolman asks the best ways to keep players interested in your game. And man, the best way to keep players interested, that's a loaded question right there. Oh man, the comments are building up. This is blowing up. So he asks how to keep players interested in your game. And the best advice I can give about this without getting too super long-winded is talk to your players about, like, before you start the campaign and also during the campaign. Don't be afraid to talk to your players about what they want to do. You know, asking your players, what kind of campaign do you guys want to do? Do you want to do high magic, low magic? You know, do you want to be sandbox, or do you want to be kind of more railroady? You know, do you want, you know, like lots of political intrigue? Do you want lots of combat? Do you want lots of dungeon delving? Do you want to be solving mysteries? And that'll kind of give you a good kind of temperature for what your players want to do. And don't be afraid to do that during the campaign too, because, you know, people get burned out on stuff. It happens. And asking your players, you know, where do you guys want to go from here? Like, what direction do you think your characters are going to want to go? You know, do you want to go explore this area? Do you kind of want to dump this task here and go do something else? Is there anything that I've mentioned in the lore that, you know, that kind of piques your fancy? Stuff like that. Just kind of maintaining like out-of-game contact with your players about the game and how it's going, and if they're having fun is really important. And then the other tip I would give for keeping your players interested is always do variety. Don't just do the same thing every session. Kind of break it up a little bit. Don't be afraid to have sessions that are super combat heavy, or sessions that have no combat whatsoever. You know, keeping it fresh and varied is really important when you're GMing. So don't be afraid to kind of mix it up a little bit, and maybe even go outside your comfort zone, you know? So that's what I would say for that. So I'm going to do one more from Facebook, and then I'm going to come back to the comments that are piling up in the comments here. Okay, Jamie Renix asks, how do I join a group when none of my friends want to play? Well, the best advice I can give you is seek out groups online. There are lots of different groups that run games right here on Google Hangouts. I've played in lots of those games. I've run a couple myself. Beyond that, there's lots of games happening on Roll20 and services like that. There's lots of forums for finding games that will be run online on Google Hangouts, Skype, Roll20, everything like that. With technology advancing the way it is, there's really no reason to not be gaming now. Even if you have no players around you, nobody wanting to play in your friends or your immediate circle of acquaintances, you can find a game. All kinds of games, any game you want to play, whether it's typical fantasy D&D stuff or Call of Cthulhu or Numenera or Exalted or anything like that. You can you find a game. Just search around online. There are lots of resources out there for you. Okay, so I'm going to check YouTube comments really quick. I was not expecting this many questions. This is what happens when you don't make videos for 5 months and then come back all of a sudden. Okay, while that loads, I'm going to answer some questions in the Q&A here. So, Cosgang555 asks, have you ever given players a deck of many things? No, I have not, but I have a physical deck of many things if I ever decide to do that. Another question from Mihai. Asks, have you tried other RPGs? Call of Cthulhu, One Ring, Warhammer. Can you say a few words quickly about them? I need a change of scenery from the D&D world and don't know what to try. I've played a lot of different RPGs. I played Call of Cthulhu, Warhammer Fantasy, Legend of the Five Rings, Song of Ice and Fire, Deadlands, lots of different Savage Worlds stuff. I've played Mutants and Masterminds. I've played Star Wars, D6, and Saga Edition. I think that's the main ones I've played. I'm looking back at my book. I've played the Conan RPG a little bit too. But yeah, it really depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking to get away from like the D&D stuff, I would advise you to go completely different. Do something that's away from the typical medieval fantasy, and maybe look into something like Call of Cthulhu or a pulp setting or something like that, or some D20 modern, some Star Wars, something like that. I find whenever I'm getting burned out, it doesn't help to switch systems where the setting or the tone of the game is very similar. Like I'll still kind of feel that same burnout feeling. So I usually turn to something like Call of Cthulhu or something like that, where it's like a very different kind of feel to the game. With D&D, the games are a lot about like delving into dungeons, solving puzzles, killing monsters. Whereas Call of Cthulhu, it's all about kind of the terror and the mystery, and it's got definitely a different feel to it, and the system feels a lot different too. So that's what I would say about that. Oh, and I was done with that deck of many things question. So, man, this Q&A thing on Google Hangouts is really cool. I like it. I didn't even know this was a thing. Let me check the actual YouTube comments here. Micah Henry asks, for the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, where in Faerun have you run campaigns? I usually run stuff in the Sword Coast, Neverwinter, Waterdeep, Luskan, places like that, Baldur's Gate. And then I've run campaigns that are set in the Forgotten Realms, but elsewhere on continents and islands that I just make up. So that kind of allows me to have my own landscape and characters and stuff like that, but it still has the Forgotten Realms flavor and gods and monsters and stuff like that. So, Jill Monroe asks, what has been my favorite element of a world that I've created? Probably, I had a lot of fun running this campaign that was set in a city between dimensions. It was called the City of Javar, and it was basically the city that you could only find if you were lost, like one of those paradox type things. And it was basically a city of lost souls. It was anyone who was traveling across the planes, through the dimensions, through the universes, who had lost their way, had found their way to this city. And so it was kind of just like people from all over the place. And that was a really fun, kind of very neat campaign. Natural 20 Films, how's it going, man? He asks if I like to include collateral effects in combat, such as players getting knocked through doors, Candelabras falling over and setting the drapes on fire, oil spilling on the floor, PCs sliding around, floors collapsing. I love that stuff. I love it too, man. That's one of my favorite things. I love having things like that happen, or simply putting stuff in the encounter space that the PCs can interact with. Yeah, even if I don't say straight up, hey, you could use this in the combat, like they'll find their way to it. So I love having stuff fall over, things catch fire, spells go off. If spells miss, go off and have things fall down. I love stuff like that. I actually have somewhere I have a sheet that I think it's from the Dungeon Alphabet. Great book. It's a sheet basically of things to happen during your encounter, and it's a roll table, and you roll on it, and it says things like the floor caves in, or like water starts filling the room, stuff like that. So it gives you kind of stuff to work with in encounters where I think just crazy shit can start happening. So I like stuff like that. Micah Henry asks, what's the best module I've run? Sunless Citadel is my favorite adventure module. I don't run a lot of modules. I ran, oh man, what was it called? The Council of Thieves, is that what it was called? Yeah, I think it was called Council of Thieves for Pathfinder. I ran a little bit of that, and then I just scrapped those books and came up with my own thing. But Sunless Citadel is probably my favorite module. And then Micah Henry asks, what's my favorite 3.5 splat book, and what has been the most useful? My favorite 3.5 splat book is probably the Puzzles book, which I've got printed out PDF somewhere around here. That's got lots of fun stuff in it. Just refreshing here. Okay, cool. I think I'm starting to get ahead of these comments here. So let's see. So Ed Hell Dude had a question a while ago. I'm going to go ahead and answer that one in the Q&A here. Do you have some general GM tools or methods you use in every campaign? Do you have random tables for weather, plot twists? And if so, do your players participate in creating, interpreting those? I have some stuff I use in pretty much every campaign. Like I said before, the puzzle books and random roll tables like the Dungeon Alphabet and stuff. The Paizo's Pathfinder Game Mastery Guide has a lot of great roll tables in it as well. I've never had my players kind of be active participants in preparing those materials. I've never really thought about doing that. It's a good idea to have your players kind of help you out with stuff like that, but at the same time, I can be a bit of a control freak about that kind of stuff, and I like to kind of handle it all on my own. So roll tables are really great, both for prep and for on-the-fly type stuff. A lot of GMs just expect themselves to just be brilliant all the time, 24 hours a day, come up with these great, plots with political intrigue and all this stuff. And it's like, you got to give yourself some crutches. You got to give yourself some stuff that will help you. Part of being a smart GM is, having the tools that will help you be creative and help you come up with stuff. So, and then another question here on the Q&A from the Harvestarian asked, do you have opinions on how arcane magic works in Pathfinder? I've been imagining that one wizard might say, a spell is a sculpting and projection of mental energies, while another may say, arcane power comes from these special symbols in my spellbook. I've never thought about magic too concretely. I really like thinking about magic coming from different sources depending on who's drawing upon it. In the Forgotten Realms, they have the Weave, which is basically this, primal plane where all of these primordial magic, arcane energies come from. And then, of course, divine magic comes from, divine beings. But then you look at things like druids, where it's like the magic is coming from the earth itself, And so, basically, how I think of magic users is that there's magic everywhere. There's magic in everything. There's magic in this spellbook. There's magic in this leaf. And it's all about how you draw out that magic and draw upon the magic. So I'm always up for, if you're playing a spellcaster and you come up with an interesting way for you to use your magic, then I'm game for it. I had a friend, a buddy of mine, who had a character who was a cleric who drew his magic by intercepting people's prayers to the gods. And it was such an interesting concept that I was like, yes, that's awesome. Like, it was a very, very neat idea. Unfortunately, I didn't get to play with that character. It was just a buddy of mine was telling me about it. But, you know, things like that, that's such an interesting idea. It's like, I'm a cleric, but I'm not following a god. I am intercepting people's prayers and using their prayers to, I'm drawing the magic from those prayers, basically. So I love stuff like that. Don't be afraid to think about magic in different ways. That is for sure. Okay, looks like we got some more comments here. Machine Nightmare asks, how do you feel about the controversies surrounding RPGs? Not sure what you mean specifically by controversies. I'm assuming like in the 70s and 80s when a lot of Christian groups were saying that D&D was demonic and satanic and that you know, it would lead kids to witchcraft and blood sacrifice and stuff like that. I mean, all that stuff is just, people latch onto stuff, you know. If it's not video games, it's movies. If it's not movies, it's music. If it's not music, it's comic books. People always look for the source of problems in, like, the stuff we create, but it's not that. It's instead of looking at why these people have problems and what we could have done to help those people, you know, people look at, oh, this kid committed suicide because he played D&D, you know, and they try to draw these correlations that don't actually exist. So all of those, the controversies surrounding RPGs, it's just, you know, it's the same as people getting upset at, you know, rap music and metal music and, you know, violence and boobs in comic books and stuff like that. So it's just, it's a bunch of malarkey as far as I'm concerned. Okay, another question from Facebook here. Declan Death asks, what was the weirdest experience you had during a game session? Oh, man. All right. Weirdest experience I've had during a game session. Weirdest experience. I don't know. I mean, I've had some weird stuff happen during games. Nothing that's, like, outright crazy. I talked about this before, but I played in this disastrous Star Wars RPG a few years ago when I was still gaming in college, and the GM was just horrible. Really, it was just an awful campaign. But probably the weirdest experience I had was falling off of my ship while trying to stomp on Minox because I couldn't shoot them with my blaster, and that whole situation was really weird. We ended up, the whole party got killed because our medic threw a thermal detonator into the room that we were fighting in and closed the door on board a Star Destroyer. So whoever was not killed in the immediate blast was sucked into space. So that was pretty fun. But in terms of like weird, like uncomfortable stuff, I don't know, nothing really, I guess. I've played with weird players. I've played with players that have come prepared with like speeches they're gonna say and stuff like that, and it's always awkward when you're just kind of sitting there when that kind of stuff happens. But I don't know, nothing too weird. Another question from Facebook here. Bryce Swanson asks, any suggestions on making encounters more of a challenge for higher level characters without resorting to a rogue Tarrasque? Yeah, it gets tough when you've got players that are, you know, level 10 and above, and you're trying to come up with ways to challenge them, but you don't want to just be like, you fight 4 pit fiends, you know? So what I would say is think about it strategically. So a great example of this is, oh man, I forget the guy's name, but this guy wrote, it's a famous article where this guy basically wiped out his party of like level 15s with kobolds. And he didn't do anything to these kobolds. He didn't level them up. He didn't give them magical weapons. He just set it up in a way where they were just getting like reamed by these kobolds. And it's all about hazards, terrain, and placement. You know, where are the PCs? Are they in a spot that makes it difficult to fight? If you've got high-level PCs, don't put them in a room with orcs. Put them in a room with orcs that is slowly caving in on itself. Put them in a room with orcs that is flooding. Put them in a room with orcs that is burning. Put them in a room with orcs and orcs who are above shooting down on them, and they have to think about how to get up there and deal with those orcs, you know. Anything can be a threat if used in the right way. So don't think about monster level. Don't think about challenge rating. Don't think about experience points. Think about, what monster do I want to use? How do I make it a challenge for the players? So think about it like that. Let's see here. Got some more questions on YouTube. Alfredo Martinez asks, what is my favorite class to play? Fighter. No. Rogue. No. Cleric. It's a three-way tie between Fighter, Rogue, and Cleric. Those are absolutely my three favorite classes, and also my three favorite classes to multi-class as. Usually I'll do Fighter, Rogue, Fighter, Cleric, Cleric, Rogue, or any combination of those things therein. I like a combination of being able to hit stuff and being able to do cool things. So Rogue and Cleric are good for that, and Fighter, you just can't beat playing a Fighter and, you know, kind of having them be kind of a blank slate that you can just build up, because Fighters don't have a whole lot going on mechanically, so they're almost easier to make interesting characters, if that makes sense. So I know, I'm boring. I don't like playing arcane casters. I really don't enjoy bards or anything like that. I really just like playing Fighters, Rogues, and Clerics. Almost all of my characters are one of those things. Granted, I'm playing a Druid right now and have been for the last year and a half, but it's different circumstances. So normally I go with one of those three classes or a multi-class of those things. And then we've got a question here from the Shabaminator. Let me read that off. Shabaminator asks, what's the most interesting way one of your players trivialized an encounter? Oh man, that's a good question. I'm going to come back to that. That is a very good question. JDRD30 asked, is there a major classic rule in Pathfinder that you got rid of and house ruled instead? Yes, criticals. I hate how critical hits work in Pathfinder and D&D 3 and 3.5. I hate the idea that you roll in your threat range and then roll to confirm the critical hit. I hate that. It's just so... it's so wonky. It's so stupid to be like, yeah, I rolled a 20, but I gotta roll again to make sure I critted. You know, it's like, no. The way I play it, if you roll within your crit range, you crit. And if you roll a 20, I've actually thought about this, if you roll a 20, you do max damage. So that makes it even more intense. But, you know, people are like, well, that makes it less balanced because then your characters are critting all the time. Monsters crit too. I don't roll to confirm crits with monsters either, so monsters get to crit when they're in their crit range as well. So I hate how critical hit works in Pathfinder 3rd edition. It's probably my least favorite thing about it, right next to grapple rules in 3rd edition. Oh man. Okay, so I've got one more question here from Facebook. No, actually got three more. Damn. From Stephen Back. How do you balance character loot and equipment so that things remain fair throughout the campaign? Or do you let players work that out for themselves? On that same topic, how do you balance the loot rewards over the course of the campaign so characters don't become underpowered or more frequently overpowered as they progress through the campaign? That's a good question, man. Balancing character loot and equipment, I actually enforce splitting up the loot evenly. And I know that's kind of like hand-holding, but I just don't like it when characters try to take loot for themselves. And I know that's in character for some people. The thing is that if a thief really, really wants to try to stow away a particular piece of loot, I'll let them try. I'll let them roll their sleight of hand check, and everybody else gets to roll perception. You know, that kind of thing. But in terms of like gold and gems and finding loot like that, I really do enforce like everybody gets something. Okay, everybody fought in this battle. Everybody thought strategically. You guys all worked together to plan and strategize and beat this encounter or beat this puzzle or get through this dungeon. So the loot always gets divided fairly. And normally what I'll do is I'll ask for a volunteer to keep track of the loot, and that volunteer keeps track of all of the loot and then splits it up at the end. We usually call him a mule. So, but it's never been a problem in my party or in my group either, where people are you know, getting all upset about the loot and stuff like that. It doesn't really happen in my group. So, and then your other question is, how do you balance loot rewards over the course of the campaign so people don't become underpowered or overpowered? Really, it's like, it's just a use your best judgment type thing. It's like a use common sense type thing. Like, don't give a level 1 character a +3 sword. But also, like, by level 10, the characters should probably have a couple magic items between them. You know what I mean? And, like, really, it's a common sense thing, and it also depends on the setting you're running. You know what I mean? Like, if you're running low magic, you can't walk into a store and buy a +4 flaming sword. You know what I mean? But you know, if you're running high magic, it might be possible to walk into a store and perhaps buy a magic of natural armor or something like that. My settings tend to be a little bit middle magic, so I don't usually give weapons away past +2 or 3. Like, if you have a +3 weapon, you're like, you've made it. That's Vorpal as far as I'm concerned. Really, it's just use your best judgment type thing and slowly ramp up the loot as your characters progress. You know, and don't be afraid to throw some weird stuff at them that they aren't necessarily going to use, because they'll either sell it or they'll use it in an interesting way that you hadn't really thought of before. So, all right, I've got a question here from Ed Helldude, who asks, kobolds, they're called Tucker's kobolds. Yep, that's right, Tucker's kobolds. That's what I was thinking of. And then, what has been your most successful / fun campaign, and what contributed to its success? Probably my Javar campaign, which was the campaign set in that city between dimensions. And the reason why it was successful, because it was a short campaign. It was about, I think it was 4 or 5 sessions. I just kept it really fun and light, and every session was completely different. One session was really puzzle heavy, another was really combat heavy, and the whole thing ended with a huge battle that I came up with a cool kind of abstract rules set for the battle where everyone was able to do really cool stuff during this battle. What contributed to its success was keeping things varied, keeping things fun, making sure the pace of it was pretty steady, and also giving players plenty of time to roleplay. If the players start talking to each other in character, just sit back and let them talk, man. I mean, that's something I've really found as a DM is you don't need to be the taskmaster sitting there trying to be like, you know, okay guys, we got a dungeon to get to, or okay guys, you know, the city's burning down around you. You know, if the players are really getting into character and conversing with one another in character, it's time to shut up and go get a drink or something and let them do that. And give them experience for it too, because that's the fun of gaming, is when a character just goes, so where are you from? And the character starts talking about where they're from, and, you know, maybe they're sitting there improvising, you know, a little anecdote from their backstory or something like that. That to me is really fun, and I made sure to do that a lot in the Javar campaign. There was a lot of time for role play and character development, and even though it was only 5 or 6 sessions long, like that, when I look back on it, that was probably the most fun I had running a campaign, and I really feel like everybody had fun with it too. So, yeah, that's what I would say. The other thing that contributed to the fun was just, I guess, the zaniness of it. Like, it's okay to get kind of weird with a campaign. It doesn't always have to be super grounded. You know, I came up with this idea of a city of lost souls, essentially, that was, you know, that didn't actually exist, but did, but it was between dimensions, you know, and it was in this desert of, you know, it's surrounded by this expansive desert of, you know, this void in between dimensions. And, you know, I just filled it with fun NPCs of every race I could think of, you know, having, you know, salamanders and Rakshasa and all kinds of stuff just, you know, traipsing about the city like it ain't no thing. And, you know, having crime lords running this city and stuff like that. It was just a lot of fun, you know. Thinking about it, interesting, trying to do something unique. So I had a lot of fun with that. Okay. So we got some more questions here on Facebook, and we got some more on YouTube too. So I'm gonna try to work through all of these. I'm gonna run until 2:30, so I'm gonna be here for 24 more minutes. So I'm gonna try to run through as many questions as I can in that time. Cost Gang asks, how would I make a magic shotgun? Level 9 equals 1, level 8 equals 2, level 7 equals 3, 6 equals 3, 5 equals... I'm not sure what that... I don't know how I would do a magical shotgun. I probably just wouldn't, if I'm being honest. Or I would just, like, take the magic missile spell and just say, it's a shotgun that shoots magic, you know, instead of having it be... I wouldn't come up with rules specifically for a magical shotgun. I would just basically reskin, like, magic missile to make it a shotgun. Because, you know, it doesn't make a difference anyway. Okay, trying to load some more questions here. Let's see here. Alfredo Martinez asks, how do you handle the leadership feat? Oh, jeez. How do you handle the leadership feat in Pathfinder? The leadership feat is that one where you get a retinue of people, right? I don't allow that one. That causes way too many, like, problems. We don't need 100 people following the party around. I've never used it, and I would probably advise, if any of my players came to me about it, I would probably advise them not to take it. But if they were going to, I would just make sure that they kept in mind that there were all these people either following them around or under their protection that they would have to keep track of. I would handle it like a familiar or an animal companion, where it's like, be mindful, where is that thing right now? Knight of Badassness, that's an awesome name, asks, what's your opinion of magic items? Do you have them everywhere, or are they almost mythical? As I said before, my games are pretty middle magic, so they're not super low magic like Game of Thrones, but they're not high magic like Warcraft or something like that. Normally, if you get a magic item, it's a big deal, and I like to put a lot of importance on them. Usually, my magical items will have some lore behind them. They'll be the weapon of some, you know, long-dead warrior or something like that, or they'll come from another plane. So, you know, they're pretty... I wouldn't say they're mythical, I would just say that they're rare. They're pretty rare. Micah Henry asks, have you merged Pathfinder rules with the Forgotten Realms setting? If so, how do you handle the power scale difference between Pathfinder and D&D 3.5? Well, the only thing I've done different, or that I've done with Pathfinder and Forgotten Realms is I ran Sunless Citadel with Pathfinder rules, and I just converted that on the fly. It's easy enough to do. It wasn't really a huge worry, and I reskinned a lot of the stuff anyway, so... really, with 3.5 and Pathfinder, there's so little difference between them stat-wise that it's just really easy to just kind of do it on the fly. You know, and you could also just, you could take the Pathfinder rules and the Pathfinder monsters and just run something in the Forgotten Realms anyway and just kind of do it like that. Okay, we've got a couple more questions on Facebook here. Okay. Ed Helldude asks, what are the fantasy tropes that you dislike or avoid the most, and what are the ones you use the most? The ones I dislike the most, fantasy tropes, are probably damsel in distress. I usually try to do elves and dwarves just a little bit differently. It's kind of funny, but like over the course of GMing, like elves have become less naturey and more lofty, like more into like the stars and stuff like that, and less about like the trees and stuff like that, and more about like space almost. You know, they're very into the celestial bodies and tracking the stars and stuff like that. And my dwarves have become, well, first of all, I can't do a Scottish accent. So I decided a while ago that my dwarves were going to be Russian instead. My dwarves are always, they talk like this. They are boisterous, and they talk with very thick Russian accents. And they become kind of businessmen, you know, less about, like, obviously I still have the dwarven warriors and stuff like that, but for some reason they've kind of moved more towards almost like Ferengi from from Star Trek, but less annoying. So, and then the ones that I use the most with fantasy tropes, I don't know. I like tropes. I really like tropes because what tropes allow you to do is they allow you to surprise your players, because everyone has these preconceived notions of what orcs do and what elves do and what halflings do. And then all of a sudden you hit them with something that's completely different. All of a sudden there's this evil halfling, or all of a sudden there's this this elf that has like guns or something, or all of a sudden there's this dwarf that's like some like druid that lives out in the woods all by himself, and or an orc that is super suave and debonair, and you kind of hit him with these things that are different, that kind of go against the tropes and butt up against those tropes, and it's kind of nice to have those tropes there. It's almost like a groundwork that you can build up off of. It's like when you're learning a musical instrument or a sport or something, and you have to learn all of these rigid techniques before you can then formulate your own style. That's kind of what the tropes are. They set this groundwork, and then you're able to kind of do something a little different with it, And sometimes you just got to throw in a trope the way it is, just to kind of, get reinforce to your players that the tropes still exist. You know what I mean? And then did I get a couple questions? Okay, I think that was it for the questions on Facebook. Or no, Jill Monroe asked a question. Do you run games with a lot of intrigue/politics, and if so, how do you make it work? I used to try and make like the game of intrigue and politics work, but the less time that I have and stuff like that, I kind of start to draw away from that, because it requires so much prep and foresight that it's tough to make it work. So what I usually do is I usually try to keep the plot as simple as possible, make it interesting with NPCs and stuff like that, and then maybe add a couple twists or turns here and there. But having this Game of Thrones style like web of lies that, and they all kind of meet up at the end, that's great for books and stuff. It's really hard to make it work effectively in a D&D game. Better DMs than me, I'm sure, could make it work, but I'm a simple guy, and I just like running the game and having fun with it. So it's tough for me to put forth that effort, especially when I know that a lot of it is gonna be lost on the players. You know what I mean? Like, players, I've said this before, but players aren't gonna remember the plot in a couple weeks. They might remember, moments from it. They'll remember the details of it. They'll remember certain twists and turns, but they're not gonna remember the overall plot. They're not gonna remember how much intrigue and deception there was. They're just gonna remember the fun moments around the table, and I say that a lot. So you have to remind yourself as a DM, not to get too caught up in making these really rich, like, involved plots, because, like, not to sound like a jerk, but they're going to go unappreciated pretty much. Not that your players are jerks, but just because, they're not really thinking about that kind of stuff as players. So, okay, I think we're getting towards the end of the comments here. I'm going to stick around for a couple more. The Knight of Badassness says, how often do you just wing it? Most of the time. Do you believe that? No, it's a lot of the time I just wing it, man. Honestly, that's how I kind of like it that way. I like the excitement of just having to be creative on the fly. I'm a writer. I come from a background of writing fiction and stuff like that, and having to just kind of have my brain just work like that and just be creative, and I've got my tools I know I can turn to randomly generate things that are going to happen. But what I usually have going on in my games is I've got these scenes in my head that I know I want to have happen, and I've got some ideas for how to get there, and I've got some NPCs, and I've got a few notes written down for all these things, and then I just wing it. I just, do it from there. And I've run a couple sessions that have been completely on the fly. I come into it with nothing. I'll set them in a town, and I'll just do something from there. And with the resources that you have nowadays, they've got decks of cards that have sample plot hooks. They've got roll tables with plot hooks. They've got encounter generators, dungeon generators, puzzle generators. you know, things you can create in a couple seconds right in front of you, it's easier than ever to wing a session. And honestly, if you're a GM and you're getting to that point where you're kind of feeling like you're developing your style and you're getting kind of comfortable in it, I would advise everyone to try just winging a session. Go into it with minimal prep, minimal notes. See what happens when you just kind of wing it. See what happens, you know, go from there. Stuff like that, it's fun, it's a challenge, and it really stretches your GM muscles, it really stretches your brain power. So, you know, obviously not all the time. Some people do it all the time. I couldn't wing it all the time. It's a little mentally taxing for me. I like to go into it with a lot of prep, or not a lot of prep. I like to go into it with a little bit of prep, enough prep to lay the groundwork and then build up from there. But yeah, if you're, you know, getting to that point where you're like, you know, I'm feeling really comfortable as a GM, try winging it, man. It's a great exercise, and you might find that you like it. Okay. Will Renshaw asks, is your take on dwarves sort of similar to goblins in WoW? A little bit. I like having dwarves that are technologically advanced. You know, they have access to the best minerals, the best resources, and the best craftsmen in the world most of the time if you're going by typical dwarven tropes. So having them be a little bit technologically advanced works for me, and it would only make sense that they would then hawk those wares, you know, and almost be like less goblins in WoW and more like military contractors, like selling them to different armies and stuff, and also using them themselves. So I guess that is kind of goblins in WoW. I don't know. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I guess my dwarves are kind of goblin-y from World of Warcraft. I haven't really thought about that. That's a good point. Alfredo Martinez asks, what do I think about Inner Sea Gods? Is that that's a Pathfinder adventure path, right? I have no idea. I don't even know what that is. Okay, let's see what we got here. I think we're getting towards the end of the comments here. Man, this has been a great Q&A, guys. This was a lot of fun, and man. Oh yeah, Shabominator asked that question that I was going to revisit. Okay, Shabominator asked the worst or most interesting way somebody has trivialized an encounter. Oh man, I gotta think about this. I mean, I can't think of anything specifically, but you know, there's that classic, like, you come up with this really tough encounter that you think is just going to take forever, and the players just knock it out in like a couple rounds. You know what I mean? Like they just roll really well, or they see past all of the puzzles that you set up and they just do it like right away. I don't know, that's happened to me a couple times. I really can't think of anything specifically where someone has like completely just trivialized an encounter. Just like, man, that was nothing. Like I just did that right, you know, no problem whatsoever. I can't really think of a specific time where that actually happened. But, you know, there's always going to be the session or the like the encounter that you build that you spend like hours coming up with, and you're just like, man, it's going to be so bitch, and I just can't wait for them to have to deal with this. And then, you know, they just knock it right out of the park. So, okay. I think that's where we're going to end it here, guys. I got through all of the questions, answered all the questions on Facebook, got all of the questions on the Google Hangouts Q&A app, and I worked through all of these comments here. So, all right, guys, this was really fun. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. I'm definitely going to do more of these in the future, you know, once every month or once every couple months, so I'll make sure to do this. Man, I got to go take my allergy pill. It's like, I'm having bad allergies right now. Maybe I'm allergic to Google Hangouts. It's going to be a problem. But, yeah, guys, I've had a lot of fun delving back into videos and getting back into this. You know, I've really been trying to, now that I've kind of settled into job stuff and professional life, I'm really trying to make gaming a part of my life again. And not that it ever hasn't been, but, you know, more of a central part of my life, kind of a pylon, if you will. So getting back into making videos and talking about gaming, you know, on a regular basis has really, really helped. So I pre-ordered D&D Next 5th edition, the new edition of D&D. I pre-ordered the starter set. It was $13 on Amazon the other day, so I pre-ordered that. I'm going to be doing some videos on that, and maybe running a game of that online if people are interested in that. And I'm also going to be, I kickstarted Castles and Crusades, which is a really, really awesome offshoot of D&D 3rd edition, kind of simplified retro version of D&D 3. Kickstarted that. Hopefully going to be getting some stuff from that in August, so I'll do some videos on that. And I'm wanting to get Monster Matters going again, and hopefully start on some Dungeon Delve videos, and also just kind of random videos here and there that strike my fancy. So I'm really hoping to stay regular with this and keep up with the content for you guys. So thank you again for watching. And again, I stated this earlier in the video, but really it's surreal when people comment and tell me how much they love my videos and how much my videos have inspired them to get into gaming or get back into gaming. Or that is just, it's insane to me, man. I can't believe it. So anyway, I appreciate all the support and all the views and all of that. So take care, guys. Cheers and happy gaming all.